I watched my husband vanish beyond airport security with a relaxed wave, the kind that hides intent. 7 minutes later, I was in his office, staring at a screen that made my vision blur. That was when I understood something had already gone wrong. My name is Callista Wren. I'm 36 years old, married for 13 years, and I've learned the hard way that silence doesn't mean peace, it means preparation. The man boarding that plane was my husband, Jonah. To his company, he was reliable and polished. To me, he had become distant in a way that felt deliberate. Conversations shortened. Questions deflected. Smiles timed, not felt. I didn't accuse him. I waited. I watched. And eventually I moved. Convincing his company director wasn't difficult. I framed it as concern. Burnout. A necessary reset. I suggested the business trip softly, like it was their idea all along. This morning, Jonah hugged me at the terminal, promised to call, and walked away believing he still held the advantage. I didn't go home. I drove straight to his office. The door opened without resistance. The lights were on. His computer was unlocked. That alone made my pulse spike. On the screen was a document titled, Operational Transition Active. I scrolled. Timelines. Authorizations. Internal approvals already stamped. His trip wasn't an assignment, it was a removal. Temporary, strategic, and planned. Then I saw it. My name. Written once. Then deleted. My throat closed as everything aligned. I called the director immediately, my voice tight with urgency. Cancel everything, I said. Now. The phone kept ringing. And in that silence, the truth settled heavy in my chest. Whatever game Jonah was playing, he'd started it long before I ever noticed. I sat in his chair, the leather still warm, trying to breathe like a normal person. Jonah, and I didn't start like this. We met when he was nothing but ambition and bad suits. I supported him through promotions, relocations, late nights that slowly turned into entire weekends gone. Somewhere along the way, I stopped being his partner and became his background noise. The company became his real marriage. What I hadn't realized was how carefully he'd been reshaping his life without me in it. Emails in the archive told the story. Jonah had been positioning himself for an internal power shift, aligning with a new board member, quietly sidelining anyone tied to his old image. That included me. The crossed-out name wasn't symbolic. It was logistical. Spousal access revoked. Benefits restructured. Legal language softened to look harmless. He wasn't cheating. He was erasing. And the trip? It wasn't exile. It was cover, distance, deniability, clean timing. My phone buzzed. A message from Jonah. Boarding now. Don't wait up. I stared at the screen, my fear cooling into something sharper. If he thought I was already out of the picture, then he was about to underestimate me. By the time I left his office, my hands had stopped shaking. That scared me more than the panic had. Jonah had always underestimated quiet reactions. He thought silence meant surrender. Looking back, that flaw was the only reason he'd felt safe enough to move against me at all. The signs were suddenly everywhere. The way he'd insisted on handling all boring paperwork himself. How he'd redirected my calls when I asked about updating our insurance. The subtle shift in language, my job, my schedule, my future. I'd been standing beside him while he carefully stepped away. That night, I replayed our last argument in my head. You don't need to worry about company things anymore, he'd said, smiling like he was being kind. Just enjoy the freedom. Freedom. The word burned now. Another email from his account hit my phone, auto-forwarded by a rule he must have forgotten to disable. It was addressed to a lawyer. Subject line, post-return finalization. My name wasn't mentioned at all. That's when the realization landed fully. Jonah wasn't planning a fight. He was planning an absence. And if I waited for him to come back, I wouldn't exist in his world anymore. The breaking point didn't come quietly. It came wearing a smile. That afternoon, I received a calendar invite, company-wide. Mandatory viewing. The subject line read, Leadership Alignment Announcement. Jonah had scheduled it before leaving. Of course he had. I logged in from his office, heart hammering as familiar faces filled the screen. Then Jonah appeared, standing in a sleek conference room overseas, relaxed, confident, rehearsed. After careful consideration, he said, "The board and I have agreed this transition is long overdue." Slides appeared. Charts. New titles. And then the words that crushed the air from my lungs. Personal realignment complete. A legal statement followed, brief, polished, explaining that due to changing personal circumstances, all spousal affiliations had been formally dissolved from company records effective immediately. No warning. No conversation. Just erasure. Broadcast live. Messages started popping up in the chat. Shock. Confusion. Sympathy misguided and late. Jonah never said my name. He didn't have to. As the meeting ended, I stared at my reflection in the darkened screen, humiliation burning behind my eyes. That was the moment I stopped reacting and started deciding exactly how this would end. I didn't cry right away. I sat there long after the screen went dark, letting the silence settle into my bones. Pain came first, hot, personal, humiliating. Then something steadier followed. Clarity. Jonah had always believed power was loud. Titles. Announcements. Public moves. He thought control came from being seen at the center of everything. He was wrong. Control lives in paperwork, in signatures, in timing. I went home and opened the one folder he'd never touched, the one he dismissed years ago as your little side projects. Inside were contracts, advisory agreements, and quiet investments I'd made while he chased promotions. Things he'd signed without reading because he trusted me then. One document in particular made my pulse slow. A contingency clause, triggered by intentional reputational harm to a legal spouse. He'd just activated it himself. I didn't rush. I didn't gloat. I made 3 calls. Then 1 email. Subject line. Confirmation requested. If Jonah wanted a clean break, I was about to give him one he could never reverse. Everything moved quietly after that. Exactly how I wanted it. By morning, the director had returned my call, voice tense, careful. I didn't accuse. I asked questions. Precise ones. I forwarded the clause, highlighted, annotated, undeniable. Silence stretched on the line until he finally exhaled. "We weren't aware of this," he admitted. "I'm sure," I replied calmly. Neither was Jonah. Next came the board liaison. Then legal. Each conversation peeled another layer off Jonah's certainty. The contingency didn't attack him directly, it froze things. Accounts paused. Authority rerouted. His transition stalled midair. While Jonah attended meetings overseas, confident and smiling, approval emails stopped arriving. Access failed. Decisions hung unanswered. He called me that night. "You need to fix something," he said, irritation creeping in. "My credentials aren't working." I let a beat pass. "Oh," I said softly. "That must be inconvenient." On the other end, his silence finally sounded like fear. And for the first time I knew, he felt it too. Jonah came back 2 days early. I knew because the director called first. "He's asking questions," he said carefully. "The kind that suggest he didn't read everything he signed." I almost laughed. Jonah showed up at the house that evening, still in his travel jacket, eyes sharp with disbelief. He didn't yell. He paced. That was always his tell. "You went behind my back," he said. "You sabotaged me." I stayed seated. Calm. Present. "No," I corrected. I responded. He stopped moving. "You had no right." "I had every right," I said. "You made me invisible. I just stopped protecting you." That's when it hit him. Not anger, loss. The realization that the ground he'd been standing on had never been fully his. His phone buzzed. Another alert. Then another. His voice dropped. "They're pulling me from the transition." I met his eyes. "That was never yours to take," I said. And for the first time in years, he had nothing to say. Jonah didn't lose his job that night. That would have been too obvious. Too merciful. Instead, he lost momentum. The board didn't fire him. They reassigned him. A lateral role. Same title on paper. None of the influence. His carefully built future stalled, frozen by the very system he'd trusted to protect him. A week later, the director called again. This time, his tone was different. "We've reviewed the circumstances," he said. "Your advisory agreements will remain. Independently." That was the twist Jonah never saw coming. I hadn't been erased. I'd been elevated. Quietly. Permanently. Jonah moved out without a fight. There was nothing left to argue over. The power dynamic he'd relied on no longer existed. He avoided my eyes when he packed, like looking at me might remind him who'd actually been steering all along. On his way out, he paused. "I never thought you'd do this," he said. I didn't raise my voice. I never thought I'd have to. After the door closed, I stood alone in the house we once shared and felt something unexpected. Relief. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped losing myself to someone else's ambition.